Hello, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Felipe Mican. I am the Vice President of ASOCOPI, the Colombian Association of English Language Teachers. It's great to have you all here. I'm just going to give some general words before we have our guest of today, which is Professor Camila Hernandez. So, as you know, we have been cultivating, supporting, and treasuring the ELT profession in Colombia since 1965. And this year is also special because we are going to be celebrating 60 years of existence. For you to know and for you to also remember some general aspects, we organize our annual conference that is also throughout the year a variety of activities related to teacher training programs and development programs like webinars, the ones we're having today, for example. There are also some workshops and there are some courses that we are also offering throughout the months. We do have special interest groups. You can check out all the information available on our website. And it is also important to note that we have our journal, which is called How, and you can also go and explore all the possibilities that we have to publish papers, to contribute to the academic discussions that we have here in Colombia, and of course, to enhance our profession. This is also an opportunity for us, for the board of directors, to remember that this is the annual conference. It's going to take place in Santa Marta, October 2nd to the 4th. And well, it's we're super excited of having you on board on this particular event. And well, there are very interesting scholars invited. And just let's take a quick look at this video in which our president and some of the organizers at Universidad del Magdalena also invite you to attend. So let's check this out.
Welcome to Universidad Magdalena. This year we're celebrating our 60th anniversary. Come join us next October the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 4th. We can't wait to meet you all here in Santa Marta.
Remember that ASOCOPI, it's you, me, and all of us.
Come to celebrate with us.
Okay, there we go. So come to celebrate with us. We are working hard on this event. Here you see the plenary speakers. We have Colombian scholars, some people coming from the US as well. And it's going to be a great opportunity to continue, working on what we do in our academic work, but also on the profession. And okay, without further ado, so welcome to the ones who just joined. I would like to introduce you to Professor Olga Camila Hernandez Morales. She holds a bachelor's degree in basic education with an emphasis in English from the Universidad Distrital Francisco José de Caldas. She has also got her master's degree in education from Universidad Pedagógica Nacional and a PhD in education from Universidad de los Andes. Right now, Camila is a full-time professor at the Pontificia Universidad Javeriana here in Bogota, and her areas of research include decolonial studies, intercultural dialogue, identity, and subjectivity in language teaching and learning, and also aspects related to Caribbean studies, Creole languages, and Spanish as an additional language. So Camila is going to be leading today's session entitled Challenges of Teaching and Researching Coloniality in Multilingual Contexts. So Camila, it's an honor to have you. It's an honor to have you here. Thank you for accepting this invitation, and well, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Felipe. I'm going to share my screen, so can you please uh, tell me if you're watching my presentation?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation to ASOCOPI. So it's a pleasure for me to be here and to share with you some of the reflections that I have been constructing since my PhD research that I developed from 2018 to 2021, more or less. And based on that main research, I developed this that is actually, so the main reflections that I present here are the ones that you will find also extended, develop, of course, and in a chapter that is called Challenges of Teaching and Researching Coloniality in Multilingual Contexts, in the book titled The Politics of Researching Multilingually by Multilingual Matters publishers from 2022. So most of the reflections that I'm going to present or to discuss with you today. They deal with the ideas, or with the idea that researching and teaching in multilingual contexts involve unique challenges for the researcher and the teachers, of course, and they also require specific and very well planned strategies. These mainly, it's like it's mainly based on the idea that historical and political construction of those contexts, they are very particular. Also, the second like main idea of this presentation is that all the language choices that we make in those contexts, they reflect power relations, identity, also struggles and resistance struggles that may be performed by the researcher, teacher, but also by the participants or the ones that are involved in those processes. And the last idea is that all the questions that we may ask to ourselves as teachers or researchers, they will deal with positionality issues. And according to Ganassin and Holmes 2019, specifically with what they call the identity deconstruction. So those are like the three main lines of thought that I will be developing during this discussion. So to start with, sorry, it's not working, something.
Maybe, Camille, you can try to close that little window. Yeah, that way.
Okay, thank you.
But because we see a small screen there of Meet, so I don't know if you can minimize that one.
This one? Ah, yes.
Yes, exactly that one.
Thank you.
Yeah, there we go. That's better.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so as I was saying, this reflection that I have been constructing, they are based on my PhD research that was developed in San Andres Island here in Colombia. That is over here located in the map. And this island, it's part of what some authors or in the literature you will find as the Great Caribbean. The Great Caribbean is a region that encompasses the Caribbean and Nearby areas that show the history of European colonialism, but also they share the history of slavery and also the history of Creole languages. So those are like very specific characteristics of that region. According to San Miguel, Moya, and also according to my findings during this research, these three languages that we find in the island, Creole language, that is the native language, Spanish language, and English language, they circulate on the island in a diglossic relationship, in which is relevant to identify who is the speaker, what is the intention of the speaker, of course, and the context to understand the language decisions speakers may do. So those three languages, they will be like circulating in a very natural way, we can say, but they also correspond to different and specific contexts. So for example, if we are talking about Raizal people that are the natives who speak Creole language, so they normally perform their conversations in Creole language in their private life. So it's more a language that we will find circulating, for example, at home, in the most known like neighborhoods of the island. For example, what we call La Loma, near to the Baptist churches there. And if we talk about English, well, we will find English that is more used for adult people, what they call actually standardized English, and also is a mean to construct the understanding with people who don't speak Creole, but they may be like English speakers, native language speakers. And Spanish will perform like an institutional role. So we will find Spanish circulating in institutional areas like of course, education is one of those spaces in which Spanish circulates. So So that's the main context where my reflection emerges. But I would like also to add that during the last years, I have been working not just as a English researcher, but also as Spanish as a second foreign and additional language. So some of these reflections, they have been also like reflect, or they have been uh, I forgot the word. Well, I have been like revising this reflection also under the light of Spanish research, Spanish research processes. So it's not just like a main element of English language teaching, but it would be something that may apply to other languages research and teaching processes. Okay, so I would like to refer in that context, like in the context of a multicultural and multilingual place like San Andres, but like many others in our country or abroad. Um, for me, there are two elements that are key in order to perform research or even teaching or both in those contexts. And these first reflections, they are specifically based on my research process. So the first one is one of the challenges that I face when I start doing my research in San Andres was the fact that I have a very limited oral and written fluency in Creole. So I like study a little bit about Creole before going to the island, but my performance in that language was very limited. So the strategy, so the thing that I decided to do was first to use English as a bridge, as Creole language from San Andres is based on what they call, people from San Andres call standard English. So English was a way to start like mm, making my route to the understanding of Creole. So in this sense, for me, English worked as a transitional language. Another thing was that participants, they use their native Creole language mainly to express their emotions and ideas. As I didn't was as my use of Creole again was very limited, so the strategy that I used to collect my information or to discuss with them the information that I was collecting was to ask them to explain those ideas or those thoughts in Spanish or English. That was a very important challenge for me because when we go to the field, when we are developing research, normally the first idea that we have as researchers or as teachers is that we are the ones who may have all the knowledge, and we are the ones who may determine what we are collecting, or we are the ones who determine validity, for example, of the data that we are collecting. So in this scenario, for me, it was impossible to be the one who who give like all the sense to the data, because I didn't understand all the data, of course. So it was necessary for me to give them to give my participants the power to explain and to elaborate based on their initial ideas. And what they do was to use their linguistic repertoires to help them explaining even in Spanish or English. So again, in that sense, the three languages were used in the process to co-construct the meaning of the data, and after that to analyze that data. Of course, over the time that I was in the field, I started learning more and more expressions, and I start understanding better the language. But my strategy was to start adopting expressions that were like very common for them, like me fall, that is very one that is like very common to hear in the interaction, in the normal interaction, and that adoption of those expressions start improving the engagement and the connection that I have with my participants. So this is what Bakhtin calls like appropriation of language, a strategy of appropriation of meaning, sorry. But again, that appropriation helped me to start constructing engagement and to connect better with the people. Of course, in that sense, it was important for me to conduct my interviews, but also the other data collection strategies that I perform, even in Spanish, English, Creole, or mixing all of them. And here the criteria to select the language I was going to develop the interview, for example, on was based on participants' preferences, and the idea was record their voices, even if it was Spanish, English, Creole, or a mixture of two or all of them. In that sense, the idea was validating all the languages that were involved in the process of interacting and collecting the data. Something that was very important for me was the use of translanguaging and heteroglossic practices, as they are conceptualized by Kiramba 2016, and those strategies help me to navigate my conversations and my interactions, validating again or trying to give like the same value to the three languages, and use all those repertoires to interact with my participants and also to learn myself like new things. Mm, so that's in terms of language. But another important thing here to discuss is in terms of be aware of power relationships in the interaction. So the first thing that I would like to highlight is that when we go to the field, when we are doing research, or when we are teaching in a multilingual context, there is a very strong discussion, that is a discussion of the insider or the outsider role. So in the literature, we normally see this as something very essentialized and very static. So if you belong to the community, you are an insider researcher. If you are not from the community, you are an outsider researcher. But what I discovered during my research process and the discussions that I have been having again in the last years is that those are not two roles that are static. And even there is like a space between those two roles. So when you spend a number of months, of years participating in that community, going to that community, and you learn some of their words, well, you are not like, or you may not feel, I wasn't feeling like an outsider anymore, but I couldn't say even that I was an insider. So it was very weird for me to reflect on my identity in that moment, because according to literature, I only have like those two positions, but for me it was like not being an outsider anymore, but don't having like the chance, obviously, to be considered as an insider. So I was like kind of in a space between what Martin Joe Sanders and other authors call like the space between, in which we are like not from here, not from there. We are like in the middle, constructing something. Um, Another element related to power relationship is the idea of the colonization perspective. So I am from Cali, but I have been living here in Bogota like most of my life. So when I study decolonizing theories, and when I start getting involved with these perspectives, I make some decisions, language decisions for my research. For example, I decide to write my dissertation in Spanish. That was mainly because of the fact that for me, located here in Bogota, colonization was more related with English language. Okay, so for me, it was a very decolonized idea to write in Spanish, to have the opportunity to express myself in my own native language, and not to use like English, that is the language of power and all that discussion that of course is very important. But when I went to the island, I discovered that colonization perspective there was very different from my own. So, for example, the decision of conducting my data collection interviews, data collection instruments, sorry, in English was due to the fact that they prefer they prefer to speak in English because colonization for them like has a different chronology, but colonization of or Colombianization process was even stronger, and it has like more open discussions in the island than the English colonization. So it was something very difficult for me to understand, like why for me the colonizing and imperial language is like English, and for them was Spanish. So I think that here is very important to understand that there are multiple colonization perspective, and our linguistic capital, of course, will also be different, and that's something that we need to have in mind when approaching to those contexts. That critical awareness of language dominance, of course, will enable us to position and negotiate within power relationships. So if we don't like consider those language elements, well, it will be very difficult for us also to position and negotiate our relationships in those contexts. And also, something very important to highlight here in terms of power relationships is that it is impossible not to notice that languages acquire different status depending on the participant positioning and the context where we are interacting. Again, I was supposed to be the researcher, the one who has the background, the knowledge, all of this. But as I wasn't a proficient speaker of Creole, well, I wasn't anymore the one who has the power. So my status as a researcher in that like very normative understanding of researcher just went to the floor uh, in relationship to that linguistic interaction. So it's again something that as researcher or teachers we must consider because it will be very important to reflect on those elements. Okay, so based on that context, I would like to propose like some reflections or some ideas about how to teach or how to research in a multilingual or multi or and multicultural context. So first of all, and the most important thing that I think that we should also start teaching, for example, in our foreign languages programs, is to adopt a politically and ethically reflexive research approach. So I'm a very fan of research methodology. Actually, I'm a methodology teacher, research methodology teacher, and I think that one of the things that we normally don't think a lot is the ethical part of researching. And also, when teaching, ethics is like something that we just uh, think that is like natural for us, or we just separate him in a very specific class of ethics or something like that. But actually, the ethical reflection, it's something that should be like at the beginning of all our formative processes, even as teachers, like pedagogy courses, for example, but also in our research courses. And in that sense, in an ethical reflexive research approach, I will mention that I think that it would be very important to recognize, of course, that language hierarchies and ideologies exist in those contexts. So it is very important for a teacher and a researcher in those contexts to acknowledge, to be aware on how language policies privilege some languages on the others, are marginalized. Uh, this has political implication, not only like pedagogical implications, but teaching and researching in those contexts is, as in any context, but I would say in these ones, like in a more precise way, is a political issue, is a political matter. Uh, because we are trying to give voice to the ones whose voices are not like normally heard. So we need to be aware on how those institutional demands and those, for example, language policies, they privilege some language on the others. This is not like a very new discussion. This has been also discussing by many authors how, for example, the idea of bilingualism in our context immediately give us or lead us to think about English and language, or maybe to French, English and Spanish, or French and Spanish, and the idea that they are by like two languages and not more than that. In this, in the context that I normally study, for example, San Andres, well, it's not even possible to think about a bilingual policy, because we have more than two languages interacting, and those languages need to be understood under the same value. So what does demand this in for the researcher or for the teacher is a constant reflection, a constant and critical reflection on our language choices throughout the research. So it is important to understand that those decisions that we make, for example, which language we are going to report our research on, which languages or language we are going to collect the data on, which languages will be included in our data if we are going to write our diary, if we have a diary in Spanish, in English, or so. Those are very important decisions, from the design to the dissemination, because this will impact the way we promote equity and integrity through our practice. So it's not just a matter of language, of course. It's again a political decision that we are making when we decide to include one or another language, or not to include them. Here, I will also state like a very important question, and is, of course, those are three languages, but what will happen in those contexts where we have I don't know, 9, 10 languages in the same classroom? So there the decisions will be even harder than the ones that I perform during my research. That's something that I just want to state for you to think about. The second strategy that I will propose is what I call the center on translanguaging, but not only as a method, but also as a pedagogy. So I think that it is important to give our participants or students like to be free to select their linguistic repertoires. Uh, when we teach or when we research. So imposing one language or the other, again, it will have a political implication. So in this sense, being able to give them freedom on which language they would like to to express on will help us to connect, to engage them more in the process, according to my experience. And as we are not, or it will be almost impossible for us as teachers and researchers to speak all those repertoires. So using translanguaging will be something that will help us to co-construct the meaning with participants. Of course, it will also be important for us to trust on the way we are constructing with them, because again, what the idea that we normally have is that we are the ones who construct the knowledge. When we are researching, for example, so I collect the data, I give meaning to the data. So giving the participants the power to tell you what is what they want to report, it will make you feel at the beginning like losing the control as a researcher. But again, that will be the discussion of if being a researcher is having the control or being a researcher is co-constructing the meaning. So it will lead us to think about again on what is our role as researchers. Um, Thinking about the classroom, well, again, so applying translanguaging strategies to help students to draw from their multiple language selections, and that will help them to make sense on the of the content that we are teaching, but not just to understand the content, but also to validate their identities and their knowledge systems. So again, here, like the big reflection is that when we select one or the other language to instruct, for example, in the classroom, it's not just a matter of a language, but also is a matter of identity and recognition of different worldviews. The third strategy that I propose here in my reflection is called engage with the colonial and southern epistemologies. Of course, it is like very important to prioritize local knowledge systems. So as researchers, I think that it is important that we think about the research methodology design not as a process in which we design things for other people to answer or to adapt or to use, but mostly to co-create again those instruments or those processes and those strategies based on what the people need. Uh, so that will be something that is that could be or could be like read as respectful, and also it will connect better people with our research process, because we will be like giving not only voice but also giving value to their practices and their ways of knowing. um, this is something very hard also to do, because when we are involved in research processes, normally we have like very strict agendas. So I remember that during my research, when I was collecting the data, I was like figuring out what to do, discussing with the community. I was trying things. So I remember, for example, that during one semester I get involved with photography, so I decide to make like a photography workshop with my participants, with my students. So my older sister helped me to construct like the workshop. I bought some cameras and I took them to the island and I performed those workshops. And actually, I spent like the whole semester doing that, and at the end, I discovered that the data was very, very relevant, but not for my research. I mean, yes, because I use it somehow, but it was not precisely what I was going to use to answer my research questions and my research objectives. So I remember that the demand of the university was like, what are you doing? Did you finish? Let's give us a percentage of the advance that you have this semester. And I was like, actually, like 0%, but only in the sense that I wasn't solving the research question and the research objective that I proposed for my project. But actually, it was a very, very interesting process for me. I had the chance to know indeed my students, their work perspective. I use those photographies to make a pedagogical material that I publish with a university. We make like a story, yes, a narrative about San Andres. So it was very, very nice. And also for me as a researcher was very constructive. I learned a lot. I learned to do things that I never have done before. But in terms of the strict research process that we teach to our students, it's not always very easy to try new things if we have like a very strict agendas of what making research means for us, for example, at universities. So I think that that construction or that co-construction of local practices of and local ways of knowing, they demand giving the researcher and also the teacher the opportunity to discover, yes, to try things, to make mistakes, to discover that this is not useful in this moment, or not, at least not this way. Mm, in another idea that I have here for you is, of course, rejecting extractive research practices. So it is important to understand the idea of the difference between working with the community and no, or rather than working on the community. Um, so again, having this very strict plan, designing in advance, and imposing methodologies, methods, strategies, data collection strategies, it's not working with the community. So working with them involves co-creating the knowledge, recognizing participants not just as informers, but actually as experts in their own linguistic and cultural reality. And in that sense, for example, at the beginning of the research, when I was when where my Creole was very basic, one of my fears was, are they telling me the truth? Because I didn't understand what they were saying. So I was very worried about the data that I was collecting. How was I going to fulfill those trustworthiness and validity mm, criteria that were established in my research project if I didn't understood what they were saying. So it was a matter of rethinking all those ideas of what does validity means, what does trustworthiness mean, and where, how can I actually support my research not on the base of validating something, but on the base of constructing or co-constructing knowledge with my participants. The fourth strategy that I have here for you, it's called attend to power relations in research relationships. So, of course, it is very important for a teacher and a researcher to critically examine the role of language in voice and agency. So, asking questions to ourselves as who is empowered or silenced through my own language practices? Who am I giving the power to be heard or not through my language decisions? Who chooses the language of the interaction? Should I be the one who state the language of interaction? Should I give my participants the power to select? But what happens when I don't speak the language? And what are the implications of those scenarios? So in some cases, those decisions will imply, for example, the cooperation with translators, of course, or as in my case, like empowering my participants to be co-researchers and not just like informants in my research. This is the second reflection that I have here. So in some cases, it will be important to include interpreters and translators as co-researchers. And of course, it is impossible not to mention that this can influence and shape the data that we are collecting or the ideas that we are collecting. But the main question for me here will be if that's like what is the most important for me will be my question here. Like thinking if all the time if they are telling me the truth, if I'm collecting what is valid, or actually constructing uh, a strong relationship with them and developing my research process. Those questions will be more complicated to answer in post-colonial, refugee context, context in which research has been for decades an extractive practice. So I'm not saying that this is like something easy to figure out. Number five, of course, we need to support our practices in multilingual teaching practices and research practices. So it is key to value participants' home languages, build our classroom practices, for example, in activities or interactions that actually validate what they bring with them, not only their linguistic repertoires, but also their historical background, the cultural background. And in that sense, we need to move from that idea of that they are like less important or that they don't know how to, so they cannot be co-researchers because they don't know how to research, for example. Okay, well, let's construct something that work for the two of us, instead of thinking that they are not well researchers because they have not like the training to be a researcher. um, for a teacher in this context, I think that it is very important to use and design inclusive materials and inclusive assessment. For example, the use of multilingual resources and assessments that actually allow students to demonstrate their understanding across languages. My experience in the context of San Andres is that, for example, students from this region they tend to have very low performances in pruebas saber 11 and standardized tests in general terms. And one of the facts, not just according to me, but according to many researchers, is that it is very connected to the fact that those assessments are performed in Spanish. That is not their native language. So of course they are facing not just the matter of a very complicated content, but also a process of translation during the process of solving those tests. And of course, the last idea that I have here is the importance of training our future teachers and training ourselves as teachers currently like performing teaching on multilingual methodologies. And that training should incorporate reflections on power, ethics, and of course, on translanguage. And that's all. Thank you very much. And I think that we have some minutes for questions, reflections, or comments.
Okay, Camila, thanks for sharing with us part of your research process and of course for engaging, with these meaningful contributions related to thinking or rethinking multilingualism in particular in a context which is San Andres Island. And yes, we have got a couple of comments and a question there, so I will go through the chat. And if anybody else would like to share some questions, feel free to do it. Feel free to send them through the chat box, or if you want to open your mic, you are more than welcome to do so. So Mari Ramirez says, how does your research relate to community-based pedagogy?
Okay, Mari. Well, I didn't like, well, in San Andres, I didn't perform like a specific pedagogy, like formal pedagogy process or formal educational processes, but I do was engage, for example, in those workshops that I develop with my participants. So I wouldn't say that it was based on community-based pedagogy, but yes, they were created. For example, the methodology of all those workshops was discussed in advance with a group of teachers from the island that I have like peers, like they are my researcher peer researchers there on the island. So what I tried to do was like to think about those workshops, to have like to collect like ideas on how I want to perform them, and then I make some discussions with this group of teachers. It's called DAWI. It is a research teachers group there on the island, and they help me to construct something, or I collect ideas from that on how I can organize those workshops, for example, based on students' needs. And then again, it was more like learning on what students need to develop those workshops, more than planning like a specific pedagogical strategy.
Okay, thank you, Camila. Mari, thanks over there. Thanks in advance, she said. And there is another comment and a question here by our colleague, Professor Edgar Lucero, by the way, the editor of How Journal. And he said, Dear Camila, thanks a lot for the presentation. Interesting topic for the linguistic landscape in that region. Could you talk a bit about some of those participants' multiple colonization perspectives you mentioned? Did you
Okay.
consider them in the study? If so, how?
Okay. In the like in the contextualization of my research, like in a theoretical way, yes. Before I went to the island, I make like a lot of research about colonization processes in the Caribbean. They start in the 16th century, and we can trace through the history like different moments that we may call like colonization moments in the history of San Andres. It is very complex to establish like a specific chronology. Yes, there are authors who have developed like proposals, but still there is not like a final word on how this occurred. But yes, what I could identify in during my research, and also through the years, because I still work in San Andres, is that a Colombianization process during the 80s was even like a stronger moment in, at least in their minds, in their hearts, than the 16th century. Maybe because it is more recent and they already were like very attached to the to some very important things, like for example the religion, the Baptist religion. So it was not just a matter of language, not just like let's speak Spanish, but also let's impose Christianity, let's impose a new model of education. So I have heard many stories, for example, of how in the schools where they start like the Colombianization process, they demand people who destroy their Bibles, their English Bibles, the ones that they use in the church. So it was like a very strong process, and maybe that's why it is still in their minds and in their memories. Something very weird for me the first time that I went to San Andres was that I was asking myself if I was out of Colombia. And actually, yes. So I remember that when I arrived to San Andres the first time, I really have the feeling of being out of Colombia. But I was supposed to be in Colombia. and I was like, remind me like every time that I didn't have my passport because I was in Colombia. But it was very different. Like the culture was very different. The language was very different. The customs they are very different. So I have the sensation that I was abroad, and also that's the way they feel. And you can, this is not again my perception only, but also is supported in some authors. When you ask most of the of raizales, at least they have a strong feeling of being Caribbean people, not Colombian people.
Okay, well, that's super interesting there because yes, like we may consider, like our belonging to the territory or to the sea territories, as some people mentioned. Okay, so how Colombian are we, or how Caribbean are people from the interior of Bogota, for example? It's interesting to think a little bit about it. Okay, we have got two more comments and questions, Camila, so I will go through them. I think they are related, and maybe you can have a couple of minutes to reply to them as well. So, Andrea Munoz says, thank you for the insightful presentation. Considering the principles of translanguaging, what strategies could you recommend for teachers to effectively design classroom activities that leverage students' full linguistic repertoires while still meeting academic objectives? Well, that's a complicated one. And I think that the other one, the post Martin here, is also related to it. So Martin Diaz said, Dear Camila, I loved your presentation, especially the topic about translanguaging, a topic that I am really into it. Do you think translanguaging could be useful in EFL classrooms regarding ethno-educative contexts? So well, those have to do with translanguaging. So Camila, which are your reflections related to those two questions?
Okay, I will start on the last one. Yes, I do think that translanguaging is very useful in EFL classroom. In educational context, I think it's a tool that may help us, teachers and students to construct bridges and to strengthen the relationship again, more than thinking about the language we decide for the instruction. I think that it will strengthen students' idea on how their language is relevant in their classroom. Uh, Again, I have some, for example, colleagues that work in the Amazonas, and they have stated the question that what happened when I have 9 different languages in the same classroom. How do I include all of them in the lesson? Which one did I choose? Well, so I don't think, I'm not sure if it is possible for a teacher to learn 9 different languages, even if they are very close, they are very related. And I don't know if it is a question that should that will be like very relevant for us, because I think that that's something like impossible to do. So, based on that idea, my proposal is more to think on how many languages do I have to include in my lesson? Do I have to include all of them? But just start like by doing something. Of course, always our decisions will get something behind, but we need to start by doing something, or by including them in different levels in the classroom. And for educational context, well, I will of course recommend it. Mm, the academic objectives. uh, I think that the problem here is not the linguistic part, will be the academic objectives part. And I guess that if we are more worried about the standard and fulfilling the standard, it will be more difficult to use those strategies or to include those strategies. So I will I will suggest or to start revising better our academic objectives more than the than the linguistic elements, because of course there is something that we will need to left behind. So the question is, as a teacher, based on your ethics, for you, what is easier or more relevant to include or to left behind? in my case, I will let it go. I think that my classes are just one of the classes that students will take during their life, because I understand learning as a whole life process. So if they don't learn during this semester, I don't know which tense they should learn. I guess they can do it in the next semester, or some somewhere in their life they will learn that. So because it is because of my position, of course. That's my view on learning, on what teach, on teaching, and what teaching, what is more important when I teach. So it would be a question, Andrea, on what is more relevant for me as a teacher when I teach, I guess.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your answers as well. And as well, we are just getting close to the end. So, guys, we invite you all, okay, to if you're interested in getting or receiving a certificate, feel free to scan this QR code. You would also find all the info available on our website. And last but not least, remember to follow us on social media. We have tons of events, tons of webinars, tons of activities. So thank you once again, Camila, for this insightful webinar. I think there is a lot to discuss, there is a lot to talk about, and I'm sure that we can, continue contributing to the conversation and to engaging into these discussions that are relevant for our society and, of course, for the linguistic policies, the linguistic planning, and what we do as teachers, which is at the end of the day, what calls our reflection and our attention. Yes, Daniela, I'll go back to the slide. So here you can scan it if you want. So thank you, Camila. I don't know if you have a final word before we say bye-bye.
No, thank you very much, Felipe. I think even those these are not like new topics in the foreign languages discussion, there is still a lot of reflections to do. Those are like very complex topics, so there is still a long way to go as teachers and as a researcher. So I just can say that I hope many people will get involved in those research and in those reflections, because we need more ideas to keep on this construction of strategies.
Okay, well, yeah, let's keep the conversation open. And so thank you once again, Camila. And we invite you all, guys, from the board of directors to join us in our coming webinar. It's going to be in August, and it's going to be guided by Professor Silvia Lucia Molina Higuera, and it is going to be in particular related to enseñar investigación. So we hope to see you all the coming month. Take care and have a good end of the day. So bye bye, everyone. Take care. Thank you, Camila. Bye bye, guys. Take care.
Bye.